All right, everyone. So this week we decided to combine them both into one, our research and our lineup. So instead of what we had did last time where we had one video on research, one on lineups, I had time to do both today. So I said, let's just put them all together. So we're going to start by going through ownership and then we'll go through each individual lineup. All right. And I'll explain a little bit of what I'm thinking. Probably we'll go quick down the line, but that's what we're going to do. So let's start over here. The Chiefs' defense at 55% ownership is the number one spot here. Okay. And there's a reason for that. I'm going to click on this defense. Now, they're going to be facing the Chargers. And part of the reason that I'm going to be playing the Chiefs' defense is pretty simple. If you watch the game against the Eagles, and I understand the Eagles' defense is pretty good and they played well, and I thought Justin Herbert put one of the most gutsy performances out there, right? He found a way to win them that game. But I don't think anybody who watched that game had a takeaway of, man, that injury to Justin Herbert wasn't an issue. It entirely was an issue all game. Caused a fumble. It caused on multiple occasions. Actually, it caused two fumbles. One of them was picked up by the defense. There are multiple occasions where I felt like throws he would have made, he didn't make. And I just, after watching that, knowing how hungry this Chiefs team is going to be, at home, I think this is just a perfect spot for the Chiefs to the defense to roll. And when you look at their price, you look at the team they're playing, I had to, right? It just felt like the perfect defense to put in that spot. 55% ownership. So we're doing 20 leagues total. Well, it's actually 60 leagues, but 20 in each thing, right? And in each one is in 3 times. So 55% ownership. It just felt to me like the right thing to do in this case. Okay. Next ownership, high one, 45% Travis Etienne Jr. Now, it just kind of worked out this way because, like we talked about this last week, sometimes guys get high ownership just because of their price. And if you look at him, you go, okay, I don't necessarily love him to this level, but because of his price, he ends up there. And the only part that scares me is 2 weeks ago we played ETN and he really screwed us because the backup running back actually got the touchdowns. Actually, we'll pull up that game here. Let me find a lineup with ETN. Here we go. You can see right here, 5.1. That game killed me. But he's been pretty consistent otherwise over the last few weeks. I expect him to have a good game against the Jets. If this is a game where they lean on the run a little bit, maybe he gets a few dump down passes, finds the end zone. I think we can get back up over that 20-point game. That's the hope. That's why he's in there. His price, I thought it just fit in well. On top of that, I love his matchup. He's going to be in 45% of the leagues. The next one was Devontae Adams. And similarly, I don't love this Detroit game because to me, there are so many ways this could go. And this Rams team has been rolling to such a high level that you get really scared when you get it. You don't want to have nobody, but you also are scared to know, like, what type of game is this going to be? What are we going to be looking at here? I had to get somebody in there, and kind of like with ETN, Devontae Adams at 7,200 was much more of someone I was looking to go with than Puka, who I think he's at 8,700. Just a lot tougher getting him into those lineups than Devontae. So Devontae found a way in a bunch of lineups because I just kept saying, perfect, we could add him to this one. Perfect, we can add him to this one, right? So that's why against a Detroit Lions defense, like on paper, this game is going to be a top tier game, right? This is just simply going to be a top tier game. I believe it has the highest total, or at least one of the highest totals, and I love it, right? So that's why we went Devontae Adams. He's cheaper than Puka, and I think that's going to go a long way. Okay, the next one might shock you. This is Theo Johnson of the New York Giants. Now, let me, before you go crazy, okay, because he's in what? Let's take a look. He's in 40% of our leagues. If you remember when we did our recap of last week and what we saw, a lot of those top lineups rolled with a double tight end lineup. And I realized that that's a very smart thing to do because far too often, right, we find ourselves going with these cheaper wide receivers that you're just praying they get a deep touchdown or you're just praying that they get receptions. And it's just so tough to judge. Whereas Look at the targets for Theo Johnson. Look at these targets, right? Especially with Jackson Dart in the lineup. This is Jackson Dart's guy. Okay. He is, they showed it on Hard Knocks, how they're buddies. This is his security blanket. Now, he does have a little bit of an issue catching the football. So that is a problem for us. But when I factor in his price at only 3,500 and what that opens up for us in terms of getting other guys in the lineup, and the fact that we know he's getting the targets, he will get targets in this game. He will get targets in the red zone, right? Against New England, he had a touchdown pass, right? But it was hit him right in the chest. Okay. We know he's going to be getting those looks. Couldn't pass him up against a Commander's defense. I wouldn't have played him last week against the Patriots, but think about what he could do if he just gives us that 10 at 3,500. Look at his price dips that we've seen, right? In some of those lineups that cash, they had players of Theo Johnson's caliber who didn't do well, and your lineup can still cash because of the cash savings you're getting. So I figured I just wanted something at that tight end position or in the flex spot that's going to give us a little bit of a boost elsewhere to allow us to pay up. And we just know, okay, this guy is going to be getting targets, right? And the goal here is if he can give us what he did against Chicago, huge. If he gets that 8 target game, huge. If he finds the end zone, huge. Okay. So I know that's shocking, but there we go with Theo Johnson. Next one is Shakir. So we're going to look here. Now, I got to be honest. I'm really in a bad way with Shakir so far. The last 2 weeks I have played him. Okay. I played him against the Pittsburgh Steelers. He had 1.5 with a touchdown grab, or he had a chance for a touchdown. He ran a little bit too fast. Josh Allen threw it behind him. At least that's according to the announcer. Against the Bills, or against the Bengals, I thought, here we go, right? We're going to get it finally back. And he only put up 9.6. So I am very nervous about Shakir. He has just kind of fallen off a cliff, in my opinion. Look at these last 4 games. I mean, he had the big one, the 21 against Buffalo or against Houston. And I'm pretty sure this was a big run. Yeah, I think this was. Oh no, it couldn't have been because he scored a touchdown. I thought on the big run. Maybe that was against Carolina. It was the big run. But either way, okay, he had one big catch that accounted for 44 of those. He hasn't been good these last weeks. His salary puts him in a big position for this game. That's it just mixed in well with the lineups. We're going with him 40% of the lineups. I'm nervous having him in. I'm telling you that now, okay? But last week, who did we tell you we were nervous about? Chase Brown. Chase Brown, at least in the first half, was absolutely phenomenal. So keep that in mind, okay? But Shakir, I think this is a big game. All we need is for him to find the end zone. If he gets one of those, big time touchdown catches or catch and runs, we're in business, okay? So that's why we're going Shakir. Next one. This guy is someone who I'm a little bit less nervous about. That is Jamar Chase. Look, he has the ability. They're going up against Baltimore. Look at last time he went up against Baltimore, 21 fantasy points. This is going to be one of those games that both teams need to win, right? The Bengals are certainly down way worse than the Ravens, but the Bengals can effectively keep their hopes alive by winning against the Ravens. And on top of that, they could really set the Ravens back. And I think this is going to be kind of like that Bills game where this is just a back and forth battle, right? And he's getting the targets. I don't trust the Ravens defense to really do much. We saw DK Metcalf and Aaron Rodgers really tear that defense up last week. Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase. Last week was the T. Higgins game. This is going to be the Jamar Chase game, in my opinion. And you look at his price. I mean, he's sitting at right around where he was week 1. Okay, he was up at a new high near Pittsburgh. He kind of, he's hanging around his same price. So we're not buying our stock at an all-time high, right? We're buying at where he probably should be. I like this. It fit well into the lineups. When you figure you have, such a good slate in terms of, in a good matchup here, I love it. Love it. Okay. We have another cheap tight end for you. Let me find him. Now, this is the same thing. Oh, that's Theo Johnson. We want Jay Johnson. Here he is. Jawan Johnson. Now, you might be wondering, wait a minute. What the hell are you doing? You're rolling with Theo Johnson in a bunch of lineups and now Jawan Johnson. Well, the reason for that is the same reasoning we gave you for Theo Johnson in the sense of it opens up a lot for us. And our thinking is even if Theo Johnson and Jawan Johnson, even if one of them isn't great, like let's say he puts up 8.9 for the sake of discussion, right? Let's just say he puts up 8.9. As long as we get the cash savings we used, we can add that on to whatever other player we were able to upgrade to. We're okay. It's not the end of the world. And I wanted to do some lineups with Jawan Johnson because, as you could see, he's a fairly consistent player that has had some big games. And let's just take a look at what he did at Carolina last time. 19.2, 4 catches on 4 targets, and a touchdown. This is a guy who hasn't found the end zone in 3 weeks. Is there potential he finds it here? Maybe, right? Maybe. And so I look at these targets 9, 7. Like there, a lot of targets are going his way. Could be a dud, right? Obviously, this is a risk, but when I'm factoring in that, as long as we can get, like, obviously this would be amazing, right? Maybe we're winning tournaments if he could put up this, but if we just get this 10 or even this 8, hopefully the cash savings could be a boost elsewhere. I think he is Theo Johnson. We know he's going to get the targets. Not so sure on those catches. I think Juwan Johnson, we know he's going to get the targets and probably consistently get catches. So I really like that play. He's going to be in 40% of our league. So between those two, they're in 80%. Now, some of them are doubled up in the same lineup. So factor that in too. Next one is Saquon Barkley. Look, bottom line is the Eagles are in some trouble, right? They've lost their last 3. And if they lose 2 more and the Cowboys win out, they're not even going to be in the playoffs. Now, last night, in my opinion, his numbers are a little bit deceiving. Let's just call it what it is, right? Because out of that 122, 52 of those came on one run that I thought there was a holding call. So even though Barkley had good drives last night, he did not have that dominant game. That was not a dominant game from Saquon Barkley, right? It looked like it because he had that big run. But I do think this is a perfect spot for the Eagles to get back on track. I think the Eagles are going to come out, they're going to hand the ball off a ton, and I wouldn't be stunned if we get something like this. Seriously, I don't know if he's going to get that 65-yard run, but this is, to be fair to Saquon, right? And this kind of goes counter to the point I just made, but this is how Saquon has always played, where gets a few yards, busts a major run. So in that sense, it was your typical Saquon game. The reason I'm kind of skeptical a little bit of, how his performance was yesterday was simply the fact that it wasn't one of his runs up the middle that broke big, right? It was one in which they were faking the tush push. So I just don't put it on the same as I would have, for a lot of his big runs. But I think this is the perfect matchup. If they get up, they're going to keep handing it to him. I think they're going to try to get that run game going. And we didn't see him a ton in the pass game yesterday, but he was open a lot in the pass game. He was really, really open a lot, and Hurts missed him. So factor in those two things. We're at 7,100. That's 8,000 from where he was. I love it, right? No problem for me. I think he's going to have an even bigger game than that. So he's in 40% of the lineups. Next one, Lamar Jackson, 40% of the lineups. Now, we talked about a guy who is really screwing us over fantasy-wise. Ever since he's come back, we've put him in our leagues. Okay, we did. And he just hasn't been, what we needed him to be in a lot of ways. Now, last week, fantasy-wise, he actually picked it up a little bit, putting up 22. But this is an even worse defense than Pittsburgh. He's at 6,400. Look, this is a guy that has the ability. Look at what he opened at, 7,300, right? And put up 29 fantasy points in that game. There's no reason why he can't do that here. Like, they're going to be leaning on him a ton. And you can have, as we've seen in the past, you can have games where both Lamar and Derrick Henry have big ones. So I don't think it's a mutually exclusive thing where it's like, well, if Henry gets in, Lamar's not going to be able to do it. Not true, right? You've seen what he has done in the past. Now, his rushing attempts, he still is rushing, right? You could see up there, but this certainly helped out. I think he knows that this is a make or break game for this team. And because I think the Bengals are going to keep it close, I think we could have what we're used to. I think it's going to be a coming to form game for Lamar and the Ravens. I don't know if they're going to win because I do have a lot of trust in those Bengals, but man, two great offenses, or I shouldn't say great offenses, two great quarterbacks going up against bad defenses. He's in 40% of the leagues because of his price. I just couldn't overlook him in that spot. 35% Devin Singletary. We have another New York Giant. Now, the reason I'm going with this is because Tyrone Tracy is on the injury report. I don't know if he's not going to play. My guess is he may play. I'm just completely speculating that, but it appears it's one of those injuries where misses some practice and then he ends up playing. But Devin Singletary is being glossed over in a major way at only 5,000. And why I say that is because when the Giants 2 years ago brought in Singletary, they brought him in to be that number one back. He was someone who's consistently throughout his whole career actually been halfway decent. This is not a guy who isn't a good running back, right? He is a fine running back. The problem was Singletary ended up, I believe, getting hurt 2 years ago. Tracy came in, played well. Tracy took his spot. This year, Scadaboo took his spot. So he just hasn't got the run. Well, against Washington, you are, like I said, he just fit in well his price into some of these lineups. It allows you to pay up for some other guys. And he just, to me, he's someone who is he going to have this 19.2 fantasy game? Maybe not, right? But he certainly could. And look at what he's done when he's gotten his gets the ball 17, like he could do it, right? When he sees the rock, this guy can give you what you're looking for. This one he found the end zone twice. This one he found the end zone once. I think there's a world in which he has a pretty good game against the Commanders, right? And if Tracy's not in, if Tracy ends up, not playing, forget it. He's going to be a very, very nice running back for you at a very cheap price. If he's the Giants' number one back in this game and he sees the ball 16 times, get ready. All right. Next one is Woody Marks. This is a guy, once again, it comes down more to salary. I don't love playing him. I really don't. He's in a good chunk of the lineups, 30%, but Arizona, I know it says their defense isn't good, but I just don't know if the Texans are going to be fixated on running the ball all the time. Especially if they somehow got down. My only saving grace here is I think if this defense plays the way it does, and the Texans decide, look, we don't want to be in a shootout with Jacoby Brissett in the Cardinals, so let's run the ball, let's keep the tempo low. If that's what they decide to do, maybe he ends up being a pretty good play for us. But to be fair, I don't love him in this spot, just being honest. He was more of a salary play of you need somebody at that price. 30% of the lineups is fine because I don't think he's going to have a terrible game either. I just don't know if he's someone that I look at that I'm like, everything's lining up. But if they decide we're going to keep handing the ball off, we're going to keep handing, ball control, ball control, ball control, Woody Marks might get it. And if we find the end zone, we're good. Singletary and Marks, if we find the end zone, we're good. Okay. Jameson Williams. Here's another one. 6,100. His price is high. Don't get me wrong. His price is high. I understand anybody that feels that way. Look at how low he did get at one point this year. I mean, he was down to 4,800, but he's been having some pretty darn good games, right? And when you look at him having those games, the matchup they have, I needed to have somebody on the Lions. The Rams, they're a very good team. I do trust the Lions, but do you play Jahmyr Gibbs? Do you play Amon-Ra St. Brown? Well, if you do, you're paying up a premium for those two. Jameson Williams, we were able to get at a little bit of a discount. He fit better into lineups, so that's why we're going with him. And to me, the target number is what I'm paying attention to, right? I always, when I'm making my DFS lineups, a lot of times, even if someone's having bad games, if I see they're constantly getting targeted, that makes me think, okay, the quarterback has a level of trust with this receiver. Makes me think that our floor isn't going to be that low. And for a guy who's kind of known as like, last year of being a hit or miss guy, and even to start the season, right? This is the Jameson Williams we know. Look at it. You have 6.6, 21.8, 6, 5, 2, 18.6. Look at the second half of the year. we'll go up to here, right? He's kind of found himself a little bit, right? I mean, he has this goose egg against the Giants, but other than that, even in games that they necessarily didn't play top notch, right? He's done quite well. And so you pair that with the targets. This is expected to be a high scoring game. Like I said, I really hate anybody against the Rams because the Rams, they just have weird, it's just always weird games. Sometimes there's a lot of fantasy points, but also the Rams do have a pretty good defense. So you just never know. But for his price, I didn't want to put too much stock in a bunch of Lions players, but at 6,100, he fit in well. That's why we got him. That is 30%. Oh, I did I miss Jackson Dart? Oh, I did. All right, we'll go to Jackson Dart here. To me, this is pretty simple, right? Dart has just been Mr. Consistency, and you see this fantasy wise, and there's not too much of a reason for me to think against the Commanders he can't have a big game. We need to obviously hope he doesn't, get himself hurt because we've seen that far too often. But if he's able to do it, I think he can very easily, deliver for us here. And I just think this Washington Giants game, we've seen what the Commanders have become here, right? They are really falling apart at the seams, and doesn't mean they can't score points, but I like a lot of. I think it would be, what we saw Jackson Dart do against the Patriots, which I know the stats don't really back it up, but that competitive nature, you bring that into this game against the Commanders. This feels like when the Giants maybe they do this year after year, start the season off rough. Look at all these games that they lost that are just so close, right? And blowing leads and stuff like that. You started off that way, and then they find a way at the end of the year to rattle off 3 or 4 wins into they're nowhere near the playoff, but they just find a way. And I think certainly they could do that here. And Jackson Dart, he just look at these numbers. These are just consistent, right? These are very consistent for this price. And with the slate that we have where there are those guys that are high priced, but there's not a ton. I struggled to find a ton of value at running back. This is why you have, what we've shown you here with some of these guys, 40% owned, right? Like 45% owned. 30% owned. I just couldn't find a ton of those guys at like I shouldn't say value, at like mid price that I loved. Dart allows you to get out of some of those guys and, into the other tier of players, right? It allows you to play a Williams, or it allows you to play a Saquon or a Chase instead of just like otherwise Shakir, Mark. Some of these guys might be even a higher percent owned. Okay. Slayton is another one. Now, this one I don't love. And well, I shouldn't say I don't love it. Okay. He's in a lot of the lineups because I think he can have a big game. I do think that. But here's the scary part with Slayton. This is what we just talked about. Look at his targets. Not great, right? And so this scares me. We had a good stretch in here of good targets. And when he gets his targets, as long as he's not dropping the football, he's not terrible, right? If we could find that end zone like he did last week, there's a chance, okay? There's a chance here if we could find the end zone. I think this is the matchup. Let's be clear, this is not the same team that the Giants played week one, and the Giants aren't the same team that played Washington week one. And if you go back and watch week one of the season, what you'll notice is the Commanders' offense gave the Giants every chance to come back into this game. The Giants' offense just could simply do nothing. I think that changes with Dart. I think this is a team that is really falling apart. Like the Giants kind of already had their fall apart in a sense, right? And yet they still kept it strong throughout all this. Even last week, they started making their run back and forth. I like a lot of what Slayton can bring. And look at that price, 4,400 gives us some value there. I get it. It's a risk. I completely understand it's a risk. He is in 30%. That is a decent chunk of those lineups. But like I said, he allowed me to spend other places, right? He allowed me to spend in other places. Okay. Next one is McLaurin. This is a guy I just, I look at him and I say at this price at 5,400, for his talent level, I think Mariota, I understand they didn't play good against Minnesota. Minnesota's defense, when that defense is rolling, they make people look abysmal. Just the truth. It's been happening for the last 2 years. The Giants' defense, I think, is good, and it has its abilities, but I don't think it's going to be able to do anything near what Minnesota's defense did. And so if I'm playing these Giants players, I don't want this thing to be a rout. I don't want this to be a situation where the Giants are up like they were against Minnesota, or Minnesota was up against the Commanders. I think this could stay close. And it's kind of weird because I think it can stay close even if I think, defensively and this team isn't quite what they were week one. I could see him putting up those 20s again, right, on this Giants defense. I think Mariota will find him. Look at what he did against Denver. I think he has that in him, and we'll see. So now we're into the next highest defenses. So between these two, we have about I believe, well, that would be, wait a minute. Am I doing this math right? Yeah, okay, I am. All right, 80%, right? 80% here um, for between the Bears and the Chiefs defense. Now, my thinking on this is quite simple. Cleveland's offense, everybody now is, oh, Shadur, he played, he's great. He played good, and everybody's kind of all over Stefanski. And I do think Shadur played good. And, we talked about his performance and why we had him in a few of our lineups last week. This is a perfect spot for him not to look so good, right? And I could see this Bears team running the ball, playing ball control, making this very ugly, and find a way to get some of those turnovers, right? Find a way to make some of those plays. And if they can get sacks, not give up points, I could see us getting kind of a like against New Orleans, right? Where you had 13. You only gave up 14 points. You got it, 3 interceptions, a fumble recovery here. I'm not saying they're going to do that. They might even give up less points. I think this is a spot they're going to really dominate defensively, and I don't see Shadur Sanders and company doing too much to this Bears team. I think they need this win. I think Ben Johnson has them, in a good headspace. I really like them. Now, the reason I like the Chiefs more is just because one thing we've seen is, listen, teams that have those quarterbacks that are injured, teams that are in situations where, you just know their offense is at a massive disadvantage for whatever reason, play those defenses. It's not even really about the defense, it's about the team they're playing. And so that's why with Herbert being injured, even watching that game against the Eagles, I know everybody was talking about how great that Eagles defense is, and they were hitting hard. They were playing very, very well. But it's not that I wasn't impressed, but I was looking at it from the standpoint of how are the Chargers doing anything in this game? Because I understand they're running the football, but man, it was ugly at times because of his injury. Okay, here's another guy we played last week, and he really bit us. I will say that, right? He really bit us, only putting up 1 point. But division game, like the matchup. Let's take a look at those targets. We could see what type of game he has, right? And I understand you're looking at this, you're going, well, you understand 8.7 isn't that good, right? 8.7 isn't really good. Here's the thing: no touchdown, right? He did get a target in the red zone last week. One touchdown, and this is a good game. So I think all we need is a 4 for 6 game. Give us one tutty, right? Give us that touchdown, the one that likely should have had, or as people are saying online that he should have had it, the one he should have had. Maybe Mark Andrews gets that instead. I like the targets. I like the matchup. We're gonna ride him back to back. This is something I really do quite often, and what that is when I like somebody for the reasonings, that I like them and they don't really live up, a lot of times I'll go back to the wall again and kind of double down. And it doesn't always work, right? Granted, it doesn't always work. It's not always a great idea. But the reason I do it is just because I think you have to have a little bit of a belief in the way you think about it, right? And when I look at 1 reception on 5 targets, that tells me your thinking was there. It just, things didn't work out in your favor. And when you see, like, okay, let's say they were playing Denver this week. Maybe that's not a week I decide to play Mark Andrews, right? But considering they're playing this Cincinnati team, feels like a good spot. And if I'm playing Lamar in some lineups, I love it. Okay. Let's take a look now at our next one. So Andrews is in 25%. So we have for tight ends, those are our 3 tight ends. Devonta Smith at 20%. Once again, this is a guy who fell into a lot of lineups just because of his price, and you know I like the matchup, and I don't think I think sometimes, and I fall into this trap too. I think sometimes we far too often will look at a slate and go, well, I'm playing the running back. Don't want to play too many of the receiver. He gets a lot of targets, Devonta Smith, and I understand he hasn't had those huge games. I mean, he did against Minnesota, right? I understand that the big games are few and far between, but I just felt like because of his price, because of how he fit into lineups, it's worth giving him a look. And all we need, like in this one, right? He had that 79-yard touchdown. All we need is one of those big touchdown passes. And if we get one of those, which he gets, look at all these games: 41-yard catch, 30-yard catch, 36-yard catch, 52-yard catch, right? He gets, even in games he's not scoring a touchdown, his biggest catches are pretty darn big, right? I mean, 28 last night, 30, 41. Like, he's getting those big plays against this Raiders team. Do you think that he could do something? Of course he can. Of course he can. All right, let's move on. I'm going to mute this for 1 second just because I hear my phone going off. All right, we're back. McCaffrey at 20% ownership. Now, I had to play a little bit of McCaffrey, and the reason for that is they're playing Tennessee, and it just feels like the 49ers this year, they're rolling, right? They are rolling, especially against some of these bad teams. And so McCaffrey's the guy. Every week you think maybe this isn't the week. Look at the amount of times he gets in and then the times he scores twice. This feels like a game that he could potentially get in there once or twice. I didn't want to overload the lineups with McCaffrey just because he's at 9,000. He is a crazy high number. I get it, but I like a lot of what McCaffrey can do. And the beauty of McCaffrey, right? The beauty of what McCaffrey brings is you're not just getting a running back, you're getting somebody that can play the receiver position as well. And he's catching a lot of balls. He has the ability to get in the end zone with passing TDs. I think Brock Purdy's going to be looking at him day in and day out. And this is an important game for them, right? Because their division's so good, even with their record, they can't fall asleep at the wheel here, right? They have to continue to win games. So I like McCaffrey here. I think he puts them on their back. Next one is James Cook. You know, if New England's going to win this game, maybe James Cook ends up being a poor play, but I think the Bills are going to give him a run for their money. And look what he did. I guess last time they played only 4.9. I was looking at New Orleans, but only 4.9 last time they played. I think that's going to change this time around. I think the Bills are going to have a different game plan here. I think they are going to lean a little bit into that run game at times. They're going to look to target him a few times more. This is going to be kind of that Josh Allen, James Cook mix. There's a reason, though, I didn't play him in a ton of my lineups. It's because I just don't have a ton of trust. And look at this price. I mean, he came into the year at 6,200. He's all the way up at 8,000. So that tells you the type of year he is having. And he's been worth every penny of it. This is a rough spot for him. He's in what did I just say? 15%. That is, if they're, I think they're, yeah, he's in 15%. So, and I'm trying to see what the entry fee is. I'm forgetting now, but I can't see it. It's probably on the screen right now, and I'm just missing it. But either way, 15% of the lineups, $30 worth of entries. I'm a little nervous about him, but he's good. Wan'Dale Robinson is the next one. Now, Wan'Dale, I wanted to get him in more, actually. I would prefer to have him in these lineups over Slayton, but obviously, he's far more expensive. Look at what he came in the year as 4,500. Now he's 5,900 with Malik Neighbors out. This is your guy. And look at the consistency in targets, right? This is why I'm going him, because in this game against Washington, I think he can have a big, big day. And the bottom line is we have a good chunk of giants going, throughout, and like almost all of our lineups, I think, has some sort of giant in there. We looked at Theo Johnson's targets and Wandale's. That shows you here that you could do both, right? You could really do both. You could have both of them and have your chances. He's not great getting into the end zone, only 3 touchdowns this year, but he has his, like I said, that he had one against the Lions, right, where that was one of his big games. I think against Washington, they're going to be looking to him. They're going to find him. I wasn't able to get. I wanted him in a lot more than I have him in, but that price was just it's very steep for him. 6,000 or nearly 6,000, 5,900. So he's in 15% of the lineups. Nico Collins. Look, he was someone I just had to go instead of. Well, let me see if I can find a lineup with Nico Collins. Here it is. He was someone salary wise fit in, so I put him in, and he does get targets, which I like. Not necessarily, the guy I want to trust the most, considering what this offense has looked like, but take a look at his performances in the second half of the season. He's been, a very consistent. So 6,700 fit in well, 15% of the lineups, nothing to complain about going up against the Cardinals. Jawan Jennings, another 15% here. 5,200. I'm just gonna. I feel like I'm at like a broken record at this point, but look at his targets, right? I think against the Titans, you got to get a little bit of Juwan Jennings in there. His price was fine. I struggled to find a ton of good people at that price, so he fit in well. I didn't want to overdo it though, because this could be an ugly game. Tedero McMillan. Now I have him only in 10% of my lineups, but he's a guy, he's going to be going off. I think they're playing New Orleans. This is a division game, and the Panthers are looking to win this division. They're right there, right? They're right there. And all we need is for him to have a big game. Look at this division game here. Last division game, 36 fantasy points. They're playing against the Saints. We could see some fireworks here, right? We really can. High scoring affair. That's what we're hoping for. And so, like I said, I only have him in 10% because I don't want to be all in on a game like that, especially at his price. Let's actually, I shouldn't have clicked out at 6,000. It's not crazy, but I could have replaced these two lineups with Wandale as well. I just didn't want to oversaturate it with too many Wandale plays. I wanted to have something here in case he has that big game, even if he's only in 10% of our lineup. So Judkins, he's tough because he really is a very good player. He can be a big part of that offense, but I don't love the matchup against Chicago. There's a reason we have so much of Chicago's defense. And also, the bottom line is with some of these running backs, and you're seeing it now with even Jonathan Taylor, there's a cap on how good they could be if the defense or if the offense is not clicking, right? If the bottom line is, he runs into kind of a brick wall, like even that game against the Raiders. If you watch that, he got 2 touchdowns, I think, out of the Wildcat, right? So he basically just ran him in. If you watch that game, he got 16.7. It's a miracle he got that. He went down with an injury for a little bit too. I don't remember how long he was injured for, but my point is, it's a miracle he had 16.7 in that game. There's just a lot of issues if you can't move the ball consistently enough. And if I think the Bears defense is going to be good, it makes me nervous about playing Judkins. But you want to have a little bit of him in there, right? Want to have a little bit of him in there. Next one, Xavier Worthy. So let me take a look here. Where is Worthy? Uh, Simply put, he's quite cheap. 4,500. And I understand he hasn't had a great game, but I really think the Chiefs are going to come out and give. I don't know if they're going to make the playoffs this year. They probably won't. But this feels like a game they beat the Chargers because the Chargers are dealing with injuries. Like to their quarterback. Okay. I know he's gutting it out and he got a gutsy win. That's why that win was so big because I don't think they're going to get this one. And so this is a flyer, right? You take a flyer on Xavier Worthy. He's in 10% of the lineups. Next one, another 10% lineup guy is Zay Flowers. So let's find some Zay Flowers here. I might be scrolling past some Zay Flowers. I hope not. Let's see. Where are you, Zay Flowers? Zay Flowers. I feel like you guys are probably like, he's right there. What are you doing? Where is he? Oh, got him. Okay. When I tell you that this has the potential to be my biggest mistake, it has the potential to be my biggest mistake. Zay Flowers is going to be a boom or bust in this game. Last week, we had him in some lineups. He put up 23 for us. Was very happy with that. You look at this price at 6,300. If we go back over to Wandale Robinson, okay, what was he? Let's see, right here at 5,900. Doesn't mean every lineup Wandale's in, I would be able to get to Zay, but a few of them I probably would be able to. Actually, I think this is one we're looking at right here where I have the ability to get to him. And part of the reason I guess is because I went likely. Maybe that's why I didn't in that lineup. But it makes me nervous because Zay Flowers, if he goes off, man, he has a chance, okay, to have a huge game. And there's a chance that, Wandale doesn't show up. The reason I decided to go Wandale more than Zay is because, simply put, I think the Giants, considering who they're playing, considering the targets Wandale gets, I just have a lot more trust that Wandale is going to be seeing the ball. And Zay, I think, relies a lot on those big plays. So that's why. Okay. But that could be a big regret. I mean, we're talking about, if I was able to even increase 5% ownership or 10% ownership from that, that might make a lot of sense. But that's why we decided that. Brock Purdy, 10%. I came off Brock Purdy a little bit, I have to say, in terms of in this spot. When I was first looking at the slate, I was all over him. I thought this is maybe going to be my most owned QB. But then I kept thinking back to, listen, this team could play some ugly games, right? They could really play some ugly games. Look at this game against Carolina, where, remember, that was a game he threw those picks. Just scares me just a little bit too much, in my opinion. So that's why he's low ownership, but he's playing the Titans, and we have a quarterback that, we have Jennings in some lineups, we have McCaffrey in some lineups. So I wanted to have some 49ers in there. I just don't know if, sometimes I think it's overrated to say, oh, this guy's playing a bad team, therefore he's going to be a good play. Not always. Let me take a quick sip of water here, and we're going to keep moving. Next one, Isaiah Pacheco. So Pacheco is 10% ownership. Um, I just put him in because he's quite cheap in those lineups. Like I said, some of this stuff is just I'm crafting a lineup around guys I like and who can I fit in, or how can I go cheaper somewhere to pay up for somebody I like. Pacheco fit in well in those lineups. I don't think he's like a great value play. Look at his season he's had; hasn't been great, but 4,700. If he's somebody that finds the end zone, right? Look at the last time he found the end zone against the Raiders, 12.4. Right against Baltimore, he actually didn't find the end zone there, but he had 12.8. If we could get Pacheco just moving the ball a little bit, right? Maybe he busts a big run here and there, we're good, right? And so he's not in a ton. I'm not putting too much stock into him, but I figured at his price, you might as well give it some run. AJ Brown. So, look, he's had a really good string of games here. 28, 38.2, and then 19, and they're all in losses, okay? I think the Eagles are going to go back to more what was their winning ways, right? It's pretty funny to look at this chart, or to look at I should say this chart. Well, I guess it's, chart, right? It's funny to look at the last five and to see the worst games he's had, they've won, and the best games he's had, they've lost. Now, they did win against Minnesota, and he had a good game. So I don't want to say every good game he's ever had has been him not playing well, but it appears that there is something to be said about a lot of times when they, kind of force feed him the football, that things don't go as planned, right? Things aren't quite as good. And it's funny because even if we look back at this win, take a look at the amount of targets he got. Only 6 in that game. It was 4 for 6, yet these he all had 10 plus targets. So you wonder, is there something to be said about that, right? When they kind of rely too much on force feeding him the football. That's why he's in only a few of my lineups, because even though I wanted to have something with him, this is where his price fit in well at 6,800. I was a little nervous to put too much of him in, because I do think Nick Sirianni, Jalen Hurts, all these guys are going to go, look, we got to get back to winning, right? We have to. The bottom line is, even though there was chaos from week 1 to week 11, we only had 2 losses. Okay, we were what? So that's 4, 5. We were 8-2 going into week 11, and everything has changed since then. So we got to get back on our winning ways. And I think they're going to be going, they'd rather have him, kind of talking to the media than them losing football games. Now, at that price, there's a world by the time we get to this weekend, I actually kind of take his 10% and give it to Zay Flowers, or give it to, probably not Wando, just because I don't want to have too many guys that are in that Giants game and too much ownership. But I guess what I'm saying is, there's a world in which AJ Brown there's a chance he gets pushed out of some of these just because I really think they're going to go away from him in the next game. But I did want to have, a little bit of him. I wanted to have a little bit of his if he has good performance, I want him in my lineups. Okay. So the next one is Kittle. Um, look, I was going a lot of cheap tight ends. I figured, what about a guy that's pretty consistent, right? And look at the last 4 weeks, pretty consistent for us. So that's kind of all I have to say about that guy. I mean, he's just consistent. We had the Giants defense. Not expecting a ton, but this was just trying to be a little bit different. And look at this defense has just been pitiful, right? But it is 2,700. If the trend of what we've seen continues, maybe there's a world in which this is a good play. But we only have him in 10% of the lineups, and to be completely honest with you, there's a chance we move out of the Giants defense in a big way in some of these, depending on the different lineups we have. But I just want to point out, back to the video we did on the ones that actually cashed. There were a few lineups. We did the top five. I think there was two of the top five. Actually, maybe there's just one, but there might have been two of the top five in which they had a defense. They picked the Raiders defense that put up very little points and still was able to cash at the top of a tournament. So the cash savings you get, I think, is quite, helpful. And also I paired him like in this lineup, and we'll go through the lineups a little bit after this, but Singletary is, in this. So I figure this is kind of a ball control game, right? In that case, if the Giants defense just puts up, 8, that's not bad. Okay, Montgomery. And by the way, I don't think it's going to be a ball control game, but that's my thinking for that lineup. Montgomery. I don't have any Jahmyr Gibbs. I have zero Jahmyr Gibbs. I figured you can't go into a game like this with zero Jahmyr Gibbs or none of the Detroit running backs. So I had to go Montgomery, who is only 5,000. He's starting to heat up a little over the last 2 weeks, and he just hasn't, he's been in the end zone, but he hasn't been, he hasn't had that 2 touchdown game since the game against Baltimore where he put up 32.4. Maybe this is a game where he can get that. Completely, I'm hoping on that, okay? I didn't put Gibbs in, so I figured you got to get Montgomery in a few lineups, right? You just can't have none of these Lions defense in, or none of the Lions running backs in a game of this magnitude. So we threw him in. He's in 10%. Now we're getting into the 5% guys. First one we have, I wish I could just click over here to view them instead of having to find them in the lineups, but that's fine. Let's see. I got to find Henderson. Let's take a look up here. Where are you at, Henderson? Here he is. Okay. So Henderson has been consistent. He was getting high price there, but they moved him down. Could have those big games. Against Buffalo, I just don't think that's going to be this type of game. What did he do last time? Well, this was when he wasn't playing as much, but I don't love him as a play. He fit into one of my lineups, and I figured let's throw him in. But a lot of moving parts over there. Don't necessarily love this one for him. Mitchell, Adonai Mitchell. Look, let's find him here. Let's see. You at Mitchell? Like I said, I wish I could just click over there to see this, but basically with Mitchell, he has the ability to make some big plays at times. So I figure throwing him into 5% of the lineups, no big deal. I think I'll just go through the 5% because it's gonna take forever to find their actual names on here. Here he is. We did find him. We could do this. So, playing the Jags, look at his targets: 6, 12, 7, 6. He has a chance. Look what he did against Atlanta, right? 27 points. Problem is that a lot of this comes down to them not really having a quarterback. And so if that continues, you don't love playing a receiver in that situation, but you just, I figured 5%, no big deal. Chase Brown in 5%. Don't love him to the same level I love him as I did last week, but think the matchup's fine. Wanted to have a little bit of him. Bryce Young, division game, has the ability to really go off. I actually think there's a world in which I wish I played him more, and there is a world in which, because he is cheap 5,100. There is a world which I try to get a few more of Bryce Young in some of these lineups. Not sure if I'm going to, but I really do like him this week. I just don't think I like him enough to outpace Jackson Dart or Lamar Jackson by any means. Kyron Williams, for obvious reasons, right? If the Rams start rolling, I just, with Blake Corum and all of that over there, I don't trust him a ton, but we put him in there. Isaiah Likely, I have a lot of Mark Andrews. Just want to have, someone else there. Kenneth Walker, I always feel like he's undervalued. I know they're running the dual running back set, but he is so good. So we have 5% of him. Amon-Ra St. Brown. Wish I could have had him in more lineups, but I'm a little nervous about the injury. I know he looked okay last week, but still a little nervous about the injury. There's not a ton there. Bateman, just wanted to give a kind of another option for Lamar here. Put him in 5% of the lineups. Derrick Henry, wish I could have got him in a lot more, but I like Lamar more, so that's why Henry is only 5% owned. Stafford, for obvious reasons, right? Playing Detroit, could have a big day. The Panthers and Raiders, these are two flyer defenses I went with. We actually have the Panthers right here. We can look at the price. New Orleans, they could have a terrible offensive game. Look at what this defense has been able to do over the last few weeks. This isn't a terrible defense, so I don't think they're going to be highly owned. That's just how I view that they have a potential. Don't think they're going to be highly owned. Might as well throw them into a few ones. And then the Raiders, where are the Raiders? Look, I don't think that they're going to actually have a good game. I don't. 2000, but one thing about the Raiders defense is they're playing against a Philly team that we saw the year that they fell apart 2 years ago. There might not be, I'm banking a little bit with some of my plays that the cavalry is coming here, right? They're going to figure it out. But there is a world in which they don't actually figure it out. And so we saw lineups the last few weeks. They can cash, even if you have a defense that's not great. Look at the cash savings we're going to be getting, $2,000, right? It allows you to pay up for other things. So it's a risk. I think we'll be screwed if something like this occurs. But if we could even get this, not the end of the world, right? I understand this is why they're only in 5%, that this is not what I'm anticipating, but I figured let's do it. Dalton Schultz, I do like him in this one. I just don't trust the Texans offense a ton. So that's why he's only in 5%. And then, of course, Travis Kelce, Patrick Mahomes, and Josh Allen all in 5%. Look, this is a must win for Kansas City. I like their chances. And I understand last week was a must win, but Houston's defense is on another stratosphere. So him, Travis Kelce, kind of just a big name thing, right? He might be done, right? He might be over the hill, but might as well, throw him in a few. And then Josh Allen, I didn't love him this week just because of his price. He is so much more expensive, and I don't know if he's going to have that Superman-esque game this week, but I had to get him in one, right? Because he very well could. And so we have Josh Allen at one. Guy's been unbelievable this year, but we did have this stretch right here of him not doing so hot. And the last time they played New England, 21's good on paper, but for this price, you're expecting a little bit more. Okay, so that's everybody. That's all our ownership. This week, you've probably noticed that last week I felt like I was, after seeing, because we're trying to learn and continue to build these lineups out a little bit different, but what I realized last week was just a little bit too much of spreading around the wealth. I understand I'm doing a lot of different lineups, and due to that, you want to have a lot of different people, right? I get that, but I really wanted to, as you could see, I really wanted to make sure that this week we had a lot more of 30%, 40%, and in this case, even a 55% ownership of people we liked, or that people that fit in perfectly in the lineups that we liked. I wanted to, because one of the things I realized, and one of the reasons I think we didn't cash in a ton of them, right? We did cash with one, but it was just one. And it was because, well, number one, it was because I misread that Cardinals game and that Rams game completely. That's a big deal, right? We just didn't have the right people at that 4 o'clock slot. But I think it was also because we just had too much spread out, right? Because going into the 4 o'clocks, and we still had people to go. So it wasn't like it was because we had all our guys going. We still had people to go. But we just, we were cashing in a bunch of them, but even at that point, it wasn't enough. It was like, okay, we were going to make like $5 on the day, right? And it's not that I would have been, considering how things turned out, I would have been very happy with that. I just think we had too many lineups that weren't even in the stratosphere of even cashing, and that's going to be part of it. But I would like to see this week, if we do lose again, right? At least I want to see us like, okay, well, all of our lineups were kind of hanging around that middle spot, right? Because we had a bunch of good lineups instead of, well, maybe we have one that hits big. I wanted to make sure that the lineups we built, because if we lose this week, well, that's fine, right? We lost because of the guys that I think are going to go off, not because the guys I thought were going to go off did go off. It just wasn't perfect enough. Like to be fair, last week you probably could chalk it up to, we were highly owned on Justin Jefferson and he laid an egg, right? That's probably one of the big reasons why we lost last week. But either way, I think it's a huge deal that I start seeing more of this, right? I want to be able to look at we have all different lineups, right? 30%, 40%. There's still 60% of the lineups that don't have certain players, but it's just I think it's too much. If you have 5% for a lot of guys, right? Like if the guys you like are only in 15%, well, you're not getting enough of the guys you really like. All right, let's get into now looking at some of these lineups. So this one right here, and I'm going to show you, I'll give you kind of my reasoning on some of them. Actually, we'll just go down quickly because I think we went over each player. We don't need to go through the lineup together. But Lamar, McCaffrey, Barkley, Williams, McLaurin, Shakir, Andrews, and Theo Johnson. This is what I'm talking about when I was saying, listen, 2 tight ends allows you to really pay up. This is a fantastic all-star team of guys right here, right? And even including Mark Andrews in that. This is an all-star team of dudes, right? And so when I look at that, I go, yeah, that's what I like to see. It's only because of Theo Johnson being here, right, that we could do that. So keep that in mind. This one, Barkley, Etienne, Zay, Theo Johnson, Judkins, Jennings, Chiefs. Actually, yeah, I'll show you these so you could pause at any point and go down. I'm looking through to see which one do I think is probably my favorite of the bunch. I kind of like this one actually a lot. Sadly, we only have Henry and a few, but I do like this one a lot. I like this one too. If Slayton goes off, I don't love Henderson in there though. Yeah, I don't love Henderson. So you could pause at any point. Obviously, like I said, these could cash, these could not. I really like this one too. Judkins, I don't love him, but if he goes off, this one has a chance. So that's all of them. All right. And so I hope you guys enjoyed that. We're going to be doing this every week, and we'll be looking because, like I said, this isn't I'm not some expert, right? I just kind of go with my gut, go with feel, look at some of this stuff, and so I've never done it DFS in a way like this where I'm making 20 lineups, total of 60 entries, but I've never done it where I'm making 20 lineups. I'm trying to learn a little bit of DFS and how things cash. So we're going to be looking again at the winners because the winners from last week helped inform some of my decisions this week. And it's not to say that 2 tight end lineups, you have to do that to win. I'm not making that argument. I just thought it was an interesting strategy to say, listen, if you could go 2 tight ends, right, that you think are going to do okay, that allows you so much other room to pay up elsewhere, and I think when you have those consistent tight ends, where those security blankets, it works out well. So thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next time.